This next video I'm going to share with you is real sensitive. It's about slavery. You may have heard about Harriet Tubman, but do you really know all she went through? Check this out.
Harriet Tubman, she was wanted dead or alive, but she went around to free slaves. And during that time, she helped free a lot of slaves. And I want to ask all of you on a call a question. How many of you, if you were a slave and someone came up to you and offered you your freedom, and I need you to be honest with me, how many of you, if you were a slave and someone came up to you and offered you your freedom, how many of you would go? Well, see, that's because hindsight's 20/20 vision. You're thinking of the idea of being a slave, but you're not a slave. So you have a reference point, you have perspective. But what if your great-grandfather was a slave, your grandfather was a slave, your father was a slave, everyone that looked like you, walked like you, or talked like you were slaves? How could you conceive being free if no one around you was? It's different, right? See, Harriet Tubman would go up to people that were slaves and say, Tammy, you don't have to live this way anymore. We're taking people to freedom. It'll take you 6 to 8 months to get there with us. But when you get to Canada, you'll be able to own your own land. You'll be able to marry whoever you want to. But more importantly, Tammy, your children will live free. And guess what would happen? You know what most people say? You're crazy. Don't you know what happens to slaves when they're caught running? I'm not going with you anywhere. I may not be free, but at least I'm alive and surviving. I'm staying put. Get you and your talk of freedom away from me. You get that? And so Harriet Tubman didn't say, oh my gosh, I might as well quit my mission. No, Harriet Tubman went to somebody else and said, we're taking people to freedom. Mr. Darrell Ransom, we're taking people to freedom. It's going to take you 6 to 8 months to get there with us through the Underground Railroad. But when you get there, you'll be able to marry whoever you want. You'll be able to own your own land. Most importantly, your children will live free. And then Mr. Darrell Ransom, he got excited. He would get excited. He'd say, oh my goodness, I knew there was a different way. And he would do what a lot of us would do. He would go back into the plantation and try to round up the people that he cared about. And you know what they'd say? What? You're crazy. You're running to death. We care about you. You need to stay here. I don't know what this person told you, but you're running to your own death. And they would snatch his dream of being free right out from under him out of love. And he would remain on the plantation. And Harriet Tubman would go up to other slaves and say, Miss Belinda Batiste, you don't have to live this way. We're taking people to freedom. It'll take you 6 to 8 months to get there, but when you get to Canada, what'll happen? You'll be able to marry whoever you want. You'll be able to live the life that you want. Own land, most importantly, your children will live free. And she got excited just like Darrell Ransom. And she went back into the plantation and tried to round up her people. And she met the same adversity. And her people said, you're crazy. You need to stay here. And the difference is she said, well, then you stay, I'll go. Because I'd rather die for my freedom than live in captivity as a slave. And God forbid I have the same results for my children. 6 to 8 months later, she found herself in Canada, being able to marry whoever she wanted, being able to live her life, own land. More importantly, she knew her children were gonna live free. What did she have to give up? She had to change the way she thought. See, Harriet Tubman said, I freed hundreds, but I would have freed thousands if they knew they were slaves. And you might be thinking, well, how did they not know? Well, it's the same way people don't know today. I'll give you my point. See, when they ended slavery, a lot of slaves stayed with their slave masters because they didn't know a different way. See, even though it was wrong and it was an institution that was wrong because it was legal and popularized, people will do what's popular over what's best for them. the majority of the time. It takes people like Al Thomas or people like Harriet Tubman to wake up the few so that the next generations can create something different for them and their families. My question to you is, who's the trailblazers? Because if your great-grandfather had a job, your grandfather had a job, everyone that looked like you, walked like you, or talked like you had a job, how can you conceive yourself being free if no one around you was free? See, back then, 90% of the plantation were slaves. 5% were the owners that ran this plantation. And people would say, how is it that they didn't revolt? Well, the truth is, a few did actually revolt, but the majority that didn't is because of generational thinking. And they didn't get rid of slavery. I'll prove it to you. Today, 95% are employees, and 5% of the country are still the owners, the business owners. So if the 5% are still owners, what happened? They just replaced slavery with the W-2, the wage earner, because you can't tax a slave. They found a more efficient form of slavery because you are actually in bondage for your time, which is the most valuable commodity on the planet. And see, when you're born into it, you don't realize it. And that's really what's going on. And so when you start to realize what freedom is and what it isn't, when you leave, there are people telling you you're crazy. You're trying to be an entrepreneur. Don't you know most people don't make it? Sounds just like the people out of love that were trying to keep Dale Ransom on the plantation. See, you got to make a decision. And why am I telling you this story? Because I would have never heard it. You know how many people out of my mouth this story has impacted? I would have never heard the story had I not been at my first event.